"You've destroyed this family," my mom screamed. My sister joined in saying, "You were always the problem anyway." I stayed silent, packed my things, and left that night. But 3 months later, I woke up to 17 missed calls and a message that made my hands shake. I, 32M, stared at my phone screen, the notification count glowing in the dark room. 17 missed calls, all from numbers I'd blocked 3 months ago. The message preview made my stomach drop before I even unlocked the screen. The night I left replayed in fragments. Mom's face twisted in rage, spit flying as she screamed that I'd destroyed everything. My sister stood beside her, arms crossed, nodding along like she'd been waiting years to say I was always the problem. I'd stood there holding the folder, the one with all the bank statements and forged signatures, and realized nothing I said would matter. They'd already decided I was the villain. So I packed 2 duffel bags, my laptop, the folder. I left my childhood bedroom key on the kitchen counter, and drove 6 hours to a city where nobody knew my face. The first month was survival mode. I crashed on my college roommate's couch until I found a studio apartment that smelled like mildew and old carpet. The tech startup where I'd been doing freelance work offered me full-time. The pay wasn't great, but it was mine, clean money. Not like the inheritance fund my sister and her husband had been systematically draining for 2 years. That's what the folder contained. 2 years of transfers, small amounts at first, then larger chunks. My grandfather's inheritance, the one he'd split evenly between my sister and me, was supposed to be untouchable until we were 35. But my sister's husband worked in finance, and apparently, he knew people who knew people. They'd been forging my authorization signatures, claiming emergency family expenses. I discovered it by accident. A banking error sent me duplicate statements. The amounts didn't match. I started digging and found the rabbit hole went deep. Over $200,000 gone, funneled into their business ventures, their new house, her car. When I confronted them at Sunday dinner, I expected shock, maybe denial. Instead, Mom exploded. How dare I accuse my sister of theft? Family doesn't steal from family. I was always jealous of my sister's success, always trying to tear her down. My brother-in-law sat quiet, smirking into his wine glass. I showed them the statements. Mom ripped them from my hands and threw them across the room. She said I probably fabricated them, that I was sick in the head, that I needed help. My sister started crying, playing victim like she'd rehearsed. She said I was cruel, that I'd always resented her happiness, that bringing this up now, when she was finally building something, proved I wanted her to fail. Nobody asked if it was true. Nobody looked at the evidence. That's when Mom screamed it, that I'd destroyed this family, that everything was fine until I started making accusations. My sister joined in, voice shaking with manufactured hurt, saying I was always the problem anyway. I'd prepared a whole speech about trust and betrayal and legal consequences. But standing there, watching them close ranks, I realized they didn't care about truth. They cared about maintaining their version of reality. One where my sister was the golden child, and I was the troublemaker who couldn't let things go. So I stayed silent. I packed my things while they called my uncle, my aunt, anyone who would listen to their version first. I heard Mom on the phone saying I'd had some kind of breakdown, that I was spreading vicious lies. By the time I left, the family group chat was exploding with messages I didn't bother reading. The first month away, I felt relief. The second month, I felt anger. By the third month, I'd started to feel something like peace. I worked, I explored the city. I went on dates that went nowhere but felt like progress anyway. My therapist said I'd done the healthy thing by removing myself from a toxic situation. Then came the calls. I blocked them all. Mom, Dad, my sister, my brother-in-law, even the extended family members who'd sent me messages calling me selfish and heartless. But they found ways around it. New numbers, email. My LinkedIn inbox had 7 messages I'd ignored. Now at 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed with the 18th call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost declined it, but something made me answer. Dad's voice came through, shaky and older than I remembered. He asked where I was, said we needed to talk. Not angry, not accusatory, just tired. I asked him what he wanted. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, Mom was in the hospital. Heart attack. Happened 2 days ago. I felt nothing at first, just cold numbness spreading through my chest. I asked if she was okay. He said she was stable, but it had been close. The doctors said stress was a major factor. The implication sat heavy between us, that somehow this was my fault too. But Dad surprised me. He said he'd been going through Mom's papers, trying to organize things in case the worst happened. He'd found documents, banking records, statements that matched the ones I tried to show them 3 months ago. He'd also found emails between my sister and her husband, discussing how to hide the transfers, how to make it look legitimate. He asked why I hadn't told him directly, why I'd brought it to Sunday dinner like a confrontation instead of coming to him privately. I reminded him I'd tried. 3 weeks before the dinner incident, I'd called him at work, asked to meet for coffee. That whatever it was could wait until we were all together, so I'd waited, and we all saw how that went. He went quiet again. Then he said he was sorry, that he should have listened, that he'd let Mom's reaction cloud his judgment, because it was easier than believing his daughter could do something like this. I asked about my sister, where she stood in all of this. Dad's voice went hard. He said my sister and her husband had lawyered up the moment he confronted them. They were claiming the transfers were legitimate loans I'd approved verbally, that I was trying to back out now out of spite. But their lawyer had apparently told them the paper trail was damning. Forged signatures could be verified. They were looking at serious legal consequences. Mom's heart attack happened right after a screaming match with my sister. Dad said Mom had finally accepted the truth, had demanded my sister return the money immediately. Said she'd used it for investments that couldn't be liquidated without massive losses. They'd argued for hours. Then Mom collapsed. Dad asked if I'd come back. Not permanently, just to visit, to see Mom before. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I told him I'd think about it. He said he understood. Then he asked one more thing. He wanted to know if I'd already gone to the police, if charges were pending. I said no. I'd consulted a lawyer, had everything documented, but I hadn't filed anything yet. I'd been waiting to see if they'd make it right on their own. Clearly, they hadn't. Dad was quiet for a beat, then said he wouldn't blame me if I did. That what they'd done was theft, plain and simple. But he asked if I'd be willing to hold off just a little longer. Give him time to try to fix this as a family, before it became a legal matter. The idea that this could still be fixed as a family, after everything. But something in his voice made me pause. Not manipulation, just exhaustion. The sound of a man watching his family implode, and desperately trying to hold the pieces together. I said I'd give him 2 weeks. After that, I was moving forward with or without their cooperation. He thanked me and hung up. I sat in the dark for an hour afterward, trying to figure out what I felt. Satisfaction that the truth had finally come out. Anger that it took Mom nearly dying for anyone to take me seriously. Guilt that I'd left and let it get this far. But underneath it all was something colder. Something that had crystallized during 3 months of silence and distance. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need them to understand or validate what I'd been through. I'd survived without them. Built a life without their drama and gaslighting. Even for a visit, felt like stepping backward into quicksand. But I'd give Dad his 2 weeks. Not for Mom, not for my sister. For him, because he'd at least had the decency to admit he was wrong. Update 1. Dad called back 6 days later. His voice sounded worse. He said Mom was asking for me every day, getting agitated when I wasn't there. The doctors said her recovery was being complicated by her emotional state. She needed to see me, needed to apologize, needed closure. I asked what my sister had to say about all this. Dad admitted my sister hadn't visited the hospital once. She'd sent flowers with a card, but she hadn't come. She was too busy with her lawyers, preparing her defense. Dad had tried to reach her multiple times, but she'd stopped answering his calls. He said he'd been going through more documents. The full scope of the theft was worse than I'd initially discovered. Over $300,000 when you added up all the transfers, including ones from mutual funds and bonds I didn't even know existed. My sister and her husband had been planning to claim those funds were family emergency loans that I'd agreed to verbally. Dad had already contacted my lawyer with everything he'd found. He was prepared to testify against my sister if it came to that. He'd also frozen all remaining accounts and revoked any authorizations that had my forged signature. Then he told me something that made my hands shake. Mom had changed her will. 2 years ago, right around when the transfer started. She'd written me out almost entirely, leaving everything to my sister, except for a token $5,000. The lawyer who drafted it had notes indicating Mom had expressed concern about my financial irresponsibility and wanted to protect the estate from my poor decisions. My sister had apparently been feeding Mom lies for years, telling her I was in debt, that I'd asked my sister for money and gotten angry when she refused, that I was jealous and unstable. Mom had believed every word. Dad said he'd found emails between Mom and my sister, discussing how to protect the family assets from me. How I'd always been the problematic child, how I'd never appreciated what I had. My sister had systematically poisoned our mother against me, while robbing me blind. And Mom had helped her do it. I asked Dad why he was telling me this. What did he want from me now? He said he wanted me to know the truth. And he wanted me to know that he was filing the police report himself, that he'd spent 3 days trying to convince my sister to return the money quietly, to make this right before it destroyed what was left of the family. She'd refused, told him I'd always been a liar, that he was a fool for believing me, that she'd done nothing wrong. So he was done protecting her. The charges would be filed Monday morning. Wire fraud, forgery, theft. Dad had already spoken to the prosecutor. My sister and her husband were looking at serious prison time if convicted. Dad asked again if I'd come back. Said Mom was asking for me, crying about it, that seeing me might be the only thing that would help her recover. I told him, no. I said Mom had spent 2 years believing lies about me, helping my sister steal from me, writing me out of her will because she thought I was worthless. She'd screamed at me, called me a liar and a destroyer of families, and thrown me out without a second thought. If she was asking for me now, it wasn't because she loved me. It was because she felt guilty and wanted absolution. I wasn't interested in giving her that. Dad went quiet. Then he said he understood, that it was more than I deserved to be asked. He apologized again, said he'd failed me as a father by not seeing what was happening, by not protecting me from my own family. I told him I appreciated that I didn't blame him the same way I blamed them, but I also wasn't ready to come back. Maybe someday, not now. He accepted it, said he'd keep me updated, and ended the call. Update 2. The charges were filed on Monday. Dad called that evening to tell me my sister had been arrested at her home that morning. Her husband was arrested at his office. Both were released on bail by afternoon. But the damage was done. Local news had picked up the story, not my name thankfully, but enough details that people were talking. My sister's business, some kind of boutique consulting firm, had immediately suspended her. Her husband's financial firm had placed him on administrative leave pending investigation. Their social circle, the one they'd cultivated so carefully, had gone silent. Dad said my sister had tried calling him from jail, screaming that he'd ruined her life, that I'd poisoned him against her, that she'd never forgive him. He hung up and blocked her number. Mom had found out about the arrest from the hospital television. She had another cardiac episode, not as severe as the first, but enough that they'd moved her back to intensive care. She was asking for my sister now, not me. Dad said she kept saying there had to be a mistake, that her daughter would never do this, that someone must have forced her. The denial was almost impressive. Dad had hired a victim's advocate lawyer to help me navigate the restitution process. Even if my sister was convicted, getting the money back would take years, if it was even possible. Most of it was gone, spent on investments that had failed, or assets that couldn't be easily liquidated. I'd likely recover a fraction of what was stolen. But I didn't care about the money anymore, not really. I cared about the vindication. About everyone who'd called me a liar, seeing the truth. The family group chat I'd been removed from was apparently in meltdown. Dad showed me screenshots, relatives taking sides, some defending my sister, some apologizing to me through Dad. My aunt had apparently tried to start a legal fund for my sister's defense until Dad told her exactly what the evidence showed. She'd gone quiet after that. Dad asked one more time if I'd consider visiting. Not for Mom. For him. He said he wanted to see me, to talk in person, to try to rebuild something from the wreckage. I told him I'd think about it. And this time, I meant it. Update 3. I drove back on a Saturday, 3 weeks after the initial call. I didn't tell Dad I was coming. I wanted the option to leave if it felt wrong. The town looked smaller than I remembered. The house looked the same, except the garden Mom had always obsessed over was overgrown and dying. I sat in my car across the street for 10 minutes before Dad came out. He must have seen me from the window. He looked older, grayer, thinner. He walked to my car and stood there, waiting. I got out. We didn't hug. Just stood there in the driveway. Two people who used to be family, trying to figure out what came next. Dad said Mom was home. Still weak, still in denial, but stable. She was upstairs resting. He said I didn't have to see her if I didn't want to. I asked if my sister had tried to contact him. He said she'd sent a letter. He'd burned it without reading it. We went inside. The house smelled like stale air and neglect. Dad made coffee and we sat at the kitchen table, where everything had fallen apart 3 months ago. He told me the trial was set for 6 months out. The prosecutor was confident about conviction. My sister's lawyer had already floated a plea deal, reduced charges in exchange for guilty plea and restitution agreement. Dad had refused to support it. He wanted full prosecution. I asked if he'd spoken to my sister at all. He said no, that she'd made her choices, and now she'd face the consequences. That he was done being manipulated. We talked for hours, About everything. About how he'd missed the signs. About Mom's favoritism toward my sister. About the family dynamics that had made all of this possible. Dad admitted he'd always taken the path of least resistance. Let Mom make the decisions about us kids, avoided conflict. He said he could see now how that had enabled everything. Around sunset, I heard movement upstairs. Mom appeared at the top of the stairs, frail in her bathrobe, staring down at me. She asked if it was really me. Her voice was small, uncertain. I said yes. She came down slowly, holding the railing. Dad tensed beside me, ready to intervene if this went badly. Mom stood in front of me, tears already streaming. She said she was sorry, that she'd been wrong about everything, that she believed lies, and pushed away her son, and she didn't know how to fix it. I asked if she finally believed I'd been telling the truth. She nodded, collapsing into a chair. She said Dad had shown her everything. The bank statements, the forged signatures, the emails between my sister and her husband. She said she'd been stupid and blind, and she'd lost her daughter because of it. I corrected her. She'd lost her son. Her daughter was the one who'd stolen from me. Mom flinched, but she nodded. Said she'd lost us both. That my sister wouldn't speak to her. Blamed her for taking Dad's side. That Mom had tried to explain to her that what she'd done was wrong, and my sister had called her a traitor. I felt nothing looking at her. No anger, no satisfaction, no love, just emptiness. I told her I didn't know if I could forgive her. That she'd made her choice when she threw me out instead of listening. That trust, once broken this completely, might never be repaired. She said she understood, that she didn't deserve forgiveness, but she wanted me to know that she saw the truth now, and she was sorry. I stayed for dinner. We ate mostly in silence. I left before dark, promising Dad I'd stay in touch. As I drove back to my new city, my new life, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just closure. They couldn't hurt me anymore. I'd survived their worst and built something better. My sister's trial would happen with or without me. The money would or wouldn't be recovered. Mom would or wouldn't get better. None of it was my problem to fix anymore. I'd done what I needed to do. I'd protected myself, told the truth, and walked away with my dignity intact. The family that had screamed I destroyed everything was the one burning down. And I was finally, completely free of it.